I had heard rumors of the abandoned chapel perched on the hill at the outskirts of town. By daylight, it stood silent and decrepit, its spire crooked, and its once grand stained glass windows flecked with grime. Locals rarely spoke of the place, and if they did, it was with hushed reverence, laced with underlying dread. Curious whispers described distant chanting, strange silhouettes gliding across broken pews in the dead of night, and the unsettling impression that something behind those locked doors had never truly left. I was too intrigued to resist the pull of such dark tales. One night, propelled by the desire to see for myself what lay behind the rotting timbers of the chapel, I set out on the winding path, the moon a cold watchman overhead. The walk itself felt like a pilgrimage into the unknown. A bitter wind hissed through the trees, branches scraping together like the raspy breath of an unseen creature. Scattered grave markers tilted out of the earth near the chapel's perimeter, the names carved on them long eroded. Among the rows of chipped headstones, the creeping shadows seemed to pulse in the moonlight, intensifying my sense of unease. Despite the rising tension in my chest, I forged on. I told myself these were merely the battered remains of a place left to rot, nothing more. Yet, I couldn't shake the thought that the relentless wind carried church bells that refused to toll, that somewhere beyond the threshold, a silent summons was calling me closer. When I reached the top of the hill, the building's facade loomed tall against the night sky. Even beneath layers of neglect, the structure maintained a peculiar dignity. A wide set of stone steps led up to the front doors, their elaborate carvings partially obscured by thick vines. I noticed fresh footprints in the dirt, pressed into the soil by someone who had arrived not long before me. They were strangely spaced, as though the person who made them had moved with deliberate, measured steps. I pressed my ear to the iron-banded doors, uncertain what I expected to hear, but everything beyond remained hushed. No electric light shone through the crack under the doors, only a faint glimmer of flickering luminescence. Torchlight, or candles, perhaps. The idea of people hidden within an abandoned church at this ungodly hour sent a chill across my shoulders, but I knocked, foolishly, if only to reassure myself that no one would answer. No reply came, of course. Feeling uneasy but inescapably drawn deeper into the mystery, I tested the handle. The door yielded with a groan, and stale air exhaled from within. I stepped inside. The nave stretched before me, oddly illuminated by the soft glow of candles planted in corroded sconces along the walls. The wooden pews looked worn and warped, arranged in rows that stretched toward a tall altar draped with black cloth. Pieces of rubble and debris had been neatly swept to the corners, suggesting that whoever used this place did so with a care that belied its crumbling exterior. My nerves prickled. I sensed an ancient energy woven into the surfaces and corners of the church. Moving between the pews, I tried to take in as many details as possible. Gouges and deep scratches scarred the floor. The deep gloom hid the ceiling's intricacies, but I could discern the faint outline of what may have once been biblical murals. Now they were overshadowed by a pervasive darkness, the paint peeled away or replaced by creeping mold. A draft fluttered through the chamber, causing the candle flames to flicker erratically. It was only then that I spotted a cloaked figure standing near the altar. The figure's back was turned to me, hood raised, robed in a dark garment that made them blend with the shadows. For a moment, I froze, every instinct in me clamoring to run. Instead, driven by macabre fascination, I crept behind the last row of pews. Though I tried to remain silent, the worn planks betrayed me, issuing a sudden creak. The figure halted its movement near the altar. I waited, scarcely breathing. Slowly, the figure turned. It wore a hood so deep that the face remained a pool of blackness. My heart hammered in my chest as I dropped to a crouch behind the pew. Terrified, I half expected a shout or a rush of footsteps. Instead, absolute quietness pressed in. After a few seconds, I dared to crane my neck and peer over the bench. The figure was gone. My mind whirled with confusion. Had it vanished to an antechamber or somewhere behind the altar? Before I could consider fleeing, distinct footsteps, muffled by the ancient carpet, resounded from a side corridor. The echoing presence suggested not one, but many. Whatever small courage I had left began to wane as I realized I was far from alone in this place. Though logic told me to slip back outside and vanish into the night, my legs rebelled. I found myself slowly advancing toward the altar. I wanted to glean more about why anyone would gather in this decaying church at such an hour. Beyond a rail designed to keep the faithful from the altar, I found an open door leading to a narrow hallway. A faint, rhythmic chant emanated from deeper within. The words were unintelligible, a guttural language full of sharp consonants and whispered vowels that made my skin crawl. Creeping closer, I perceived that the corridor curved round, leading to what must have once been a rectory or side chapel. The flickering candle flames highlighted the trail of footprints in the dust. Multiple sets, all bearing the same measured gait. The chanting became steadily louder as I ventured round the bend. Dark tapestries covered the walls, their woven patterns depicting monstrous shapes, half-seen creatures with elongated limbs and swirling star-littered backdrops. My breath caught at the realization that these were not simple biblical scenes. Their artistry had a feverish quality, as if capturing the half-formed nightmares of a terrified mind. Each tapestry seemed to spiral in upon itself, drawing the eye to an amorphous, central shape that defied easy understanding. I followed them, entranced, and soon reached a large wooden door that was slightly ajar. Candlelight spilled through the gap, revealing a subterranean chamber beneath the chapel. I slipped in quietly, positioning myself behind a decaying wooden pillar. The room was broad, vaulted, and ringed by candles placed atop tall iron stands. A row of black-robed figures stood in a perfect circle at the chamber's center. At the circle's heart lay a sunken recess, an area about 2 feet lower than the rest of the floor. And on a dais rising from that recess stood an object draped with a tattered black cloth, and was shaped like a tall, narrow monolith, or perhaps something more twisted beneath the covering. The chanting swelled as a single figure on the far side of the circle stepped forward. This figure, too, was swathed in black cloth, but threads of crimson were woven into the edges of the robe, and a sinister masked hood concealed their features entirely. This leader raised their hands, and the circle fell silent. In the sudden hush, I felt a tension so potent it raised the hairs on my neck. I stared down at my own trembling fingers, scarcely believing I was really here, witnessing whatever blasphemous rite had gathered these individuals. The robed leader laid one hand upon the shrouded object atop the dais and began a low, resonant incantation. The language bristled with alien syllables, lurching from guttural exhalations to high-pitched keening. As the final phrase died away, they swept the black cloth from the dais, revealing the carved effigy beneath. It looked part reptilian, part cephalopod, with curling tentacles radiating from its center and wicked talons gripping a miniature sphere. The contours were strange, as though its form shifted when viewed from different angles, never quite resolvable by the eye. The instant it was unveiled, a prickling dread washed through me, like an electric current scorching my thoughts. One by one, the worshippers lifted their arms in reverence, exposing pale, slender hands. The robed leader intoned words that reverberated off the walls with unnatural force. Some dark presence threatened to take shape in the air itself. Shadows wavered across the floor, distorting the boundaries of reality until it seemed the walls and ceiling were swaying in time with the chanting. My heart pounded, but my terror was laced with an inexplicable fascination. Through some primal instinct, I sensed that each syllable uttered by these robed figures chipped away at the thin barrier separating the world I knew from some cursed dimension beyond our comprehension. Then they brought forth a stone bowl. From my vantage, I strained to see its contents. Scalding steam rose in a faint column, and the pungent tang of iron drifted through the chamber. One worshipper took a small blade, chanting fervently, and passed it across their palm. Warm drops of blood trickled into the steaming bowl, prompting a writhing swirl in the liquid. One by one, each member of the circle contributed, the chanting cresting with raw fervor. Their collective blood tinted the steam that rose, forming ephemeral shapes that twisted and twitched before dissolving into the darkness overhead. My stomach churned. A part of me was certain these shapes were not figments of my imagination, but actual manifestations, fleeting glimpses of something wretched on the other side of an invisible threshold. Suddenly, an uncanny flash of light burst from the effigy's eyes, a phosphorescent glow burning green against the gloom. It flickered and pulsed, synchronizing with the chanting. Fearing I might be discovered, I attempted to retreat deeper into the shadows, but my movement stirred a swirl of dust that caught the candlelight. The nearest worshipper stiffened. The chanting faltered for a moment, and the robed figures turned their hoods in my direction, as if guided by a single mind. A dreadful silence spread. Panicked, I pressed myself against the pillar, barely daring to breathe, hoping that in the half-light my silhouette might be mistaken for part of the decaying architecture. For a heartbeat, I believed I might remain undiscovered, but the robed leader took a step toward me, the mask turned upon my hiding place, black eye slits like a predatory gaze. He gestured, and two members of the circle proceeded toward the pillar. I was out of time. My mind shrieked for me to flee, to abandon all caution. With a burst of desperate speed, I slipped out from behind the pillar and sprinted for the door. Arms reached for me, gloved fingers clawing at my sleeves. I wrenched free, almost stumbling as I found the corridor. I could already hear the worshippers behind me, their footsteps pounding in pursuit. The chanting resumed. Only now it had an urgent, hungry tone that spurred me forward in terror. Past the tapestries and their impossible images I ran, the corridor stretching out like a labyrinth. The sense of wrongness in the air grew oppressive, as though the entire building throbbed with malevolent rhythm. I rushed into the main nave of the church, the door slamming against the wall behind me. My shallow breathing echoed in the lofty space. Several black-robed figures had emerged from side passages, cutting off the route to the exit. They advanced in a slow, purposeful manner, fanning out so I had nowhere to go but back. A swirl of candlelight from the altar revealed the priestly figure from earlier, the one who had vanished in the darkness. Now it stood at the forefront, arms raised high, chanting louder than the rest. Even across the distance, I felt something violating the edges of my consciousness. I pressed my fingers to my temples, adrenaline roaring in my veins. Then, from behind me, the leader with the crimson-trimmed robe appeared, the ghastly mask capturing the flickering light. I was caught between them. As I backed away, trying to find some gap in their encroaching ring, the wooden floor shuddered. A wave of dizziness assaulted me, and the crumbling walls blurred at the edges of my vision. The chanting blended with a deep, throbbing pulse, as though a colossal heartbeat resounded beneath the foundation. My mind scrambled to comprehend what was happening. The floor cracked, exposing hungry fissures. I glimpsed odd shapes writhing below the broken boards, as though something vast and serpentine was stirring in the bowels of the earth. Then, in a single convulsive surge, the boards were pushed upward by a monstrous force. I stumbled backward, barely staying on my feet. The worshippers seemed galvanized by this violent shift, chanting with frenzied devotion. Their robed forms swirled like shadows in a storm. High above, the rafters groaned, dust raining down in muddy cascades. The presence beneath the floor swelled, pressing up against the rotting beams that served as boundaries. My eyes watered from a suffocating stench that rolled forth, a foul mixture of decayed ocean brine and ancient corruption. Under the flickering candlelight, a slimy tendril, or something akin to it, protruded from the jagged hole in the floor, tasting the air. My entire being clamored in horror as I realized that the effigy was not a mere carving, but a representation of something that truly existed. With unholy delight, the worshippers welcomed their slumbering deity's arrival. The swirling chanting pressed in, urging the unseen monstrosity to burst through the church's broken floor and step into the mortal realm. I turned, seeing my only option for escape was through a smaller side door behind the altar. Though worshippers blocked my path, desperation lent me strength. I heaved a broken pew forward, smashing it into 3 of them, sending them sprawling. One clawed at my leg, but I kicked free. The chanting pounded in my ears, driving me onward as I dashed for the door. I twisted the iron handle, yanking it open. A narrow staircase spiraled upward into darkness. Behind me came a thunderous crash. The entire structure seemed to convulse, and I heard splintering wood, shrill shrieks, and what sounded like an exultant moan from the beast below. Sparks from torches cascaded through the air, lighting glimpses of the cultists' frenzied worship. Ascension of the staircase was like fleeing through a nightmare. Something large and wet hammered at the foundation, rattling the church walls with such force that plaster rained from overhead. My footsteps pounded on stone steps that were cracked with age. Twisting ever higher, the spiral was claustrophobic, candlelit sconces scattering each landing. My lungs burned under the effort, but a primal need to survive urged me onward. My mind churned with images of that tentacled, otherworldly monstrosity. It towered in my imagination, wrapping the building's underpinnings in its limbs, summoning the worshippers to feed its hunger for worship, or perhaps for more tangible things. I perceived Sang skittering among the surfaces. My mind rotated on the buildings to feed its hunger for worship, or perhaps for more tangible things. I reached the top at last, pushing through a trapdoor into what must have once been the belfry. The small circular space was cluttered with old rope, a rusted bell overhead, and arched openings where the wind howled in. Moonlight poured through these openings, but it cast no comforting glow. Instead, the silver beams merely illuminated the swirling dust and the frantic shadows below. The entire hillside seemed to quiver, and I swore I heard a deep, resonant groan from beneath the church. Closing the trapdoor behind me, I wedged a fallen beam over it. For a moment, I dared hope that the improvised barricade would prevent the cultists from reaching me. Then, looking out the arched belfry windows, I realized my precarious predicament. There was no easy way to descend from this height, short of falling and breaking my neck. Desperation fueled me to examine the ropes that had once rung the bell. One looked frayed but possibly sturdy enough to hold my weight for a short descent. The rope was secured to a stout wooden post near the bell and dangled through one of the arched openings. I tested it with a tug. Wood creaked ominously, but it held. Below, the ground dropped 30 feet, a steep angle sloping towards gravestones and tree roots. My muscles tensed as I slung one leg over the ledge, the frosty wind biting my face. Behind me, the trapdoor rattled. Voices of the cultists, echoing in that dreadful language, rose closer. Summoning what was left of my courage, I slid over the edge. Hand over hand, I descended. The rope twisted, scraping my palms. The bell tower's stones were slick with moisture. Halfway down, the rope gave a violent jerk, and I nearly lost my grip. The post above was cracking. Panic swept through me. Glancing downward, I realized I was too high to jump without risking broken bones. That, or worse. Then the post snapped entirely, and I was in free fall. The plunge was mercifully shorter than I had feared. I crashed onto a patch of gnarled ivy near the foundation, the impact jolting every bone in my body. Darkness threatened to seize me. Forcing my eyes open, I rolled onto my side, pain clawing at my ribs. Swallowing crying gasps, I sat up, swaying in dazed disorientation. A horrific sound tore my gaze back to the church. The entire front portion seemed to be buckling inward. Part of the spire cracked, tumbling in a shower of stone. Black-robed figures swarmed outside, some kneeling on the ground, arms raised in crazed adulation. Others rushed from side entrances, presumably intent on recapturing me. I could barely stand, but fear trumped agony. I pressed my weight on one uninjured ankle and limped away, cutting through the weed-choked cemetery. Over the pounding of my own heart, I heard the unholy roar of a colossal entity clawing its way free. I dared one backward glance as I reached the perimeter. A shape towered behind the collapsed church roof, tendrils twisting in silhouette against the moonlit sky. The night air vibrated with its presence. The black-robed congregation gave voice to its unearthly call. Slipping behind a cluster of tombstones, I paused to catch my breath. My mind reeled, certain that I had witnessed something beyond the bounds of reason, beyond nightmares. The once empty chapel was a roiling hive of activity. Whatever dwelled there could not be explained by mortal logic. I listened to the frenzied chanting that echoed across the graveyard, any pretense of secrecy gone in the face of their monstrous god's emergence. As horrifying as it was, I could sense a twisted reverence among them, an unwavering devotion to that abominable shape now rooting itself into our reality. I knew I had to escape before they noticed me again. The path leading downhill was muddied by recent rains, and I stumbled repeatedly, jarred by pain in my ribs. The chanting receded, though it never truly faded. It hummed in my ears, rattling around in my thoughts. Though I eventually cleared the top of the hill and found the main road, I could not stop running. It was as though the call of that subterranean entity urged me back, but my spirit shrank from its siren wail, terrified of the madness that would befall me if I turned around. I don't remember crossing the threshold into the safety of my home, nor do I recall locking every door and window. Morning found me trembling in a corner of my living room, the first beams of dawn clawing through the curtains. Had I truly escaped, or had I carried something unspeakable back with me? Wind rustled the trees outside my window, and for a moment, my heart lurched, thinking I heard chanting in the hush. Every so often that feeling returns, a phantom pulse of the darkness I encountered. My nights are haunted by glimpses of inky robes, the flash of phosphorescent eyes, the reek of brine. In my dreams, the beast that slithered up from the floor follows me, its countless tendrils wrapping around my limbs in unrelenting pursuit. I have yet to speak openly of what I saw that night. No one in town ever acknowledges the church on the hill. If pressed, they dismiss the ruin as a decrepit relic, best left untouched. Some nights, the faint glow of candlelight still flickers through the ragged windows, and a wind gust may carry a distant rhythmic chant down into the valley. I lie awake then, my breath tight in my chest, knowing too well what lurks behind that decaying facade. The congregation gathers for their midnight devotions, offering their blood and souls to the eldritch beast in the bowels of that haunted edifice. And though I fled in body, I sense a subtle thread of darkness tugging at me, beckoning me to return. Perhaps this is the true horror, that some part of me, struck by the awful wonder of what I witnessed, is drawn again to that cursed place, doomed to join the ranks of black-robed worshippers, lost to an abomination older than time can measure.